Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance podcast. Today we're discussing all things programming. And what we want to empower you guys to learn is all the guidelines you need to make your own effective program and use the principles and methods that we're currently using here at Benchmark Canterbury to give you the most effective knowledge and tools and guidelines to construct a powerful program that can lead to the best results possible for yourself.
So we do have about 10 guidelines that we want to go over today. And the idea is that we consider ourselves as evidence-based as possible a gym can be. We're continuously in the pursuit of knowledge. We're always learning. And when it does come to learning, there is contradictions and there's just so much to learn and things are always changing. So the issue is that what we're giving you today is very theoretical. It's anecdotal as well. And it's things that we've learned over time and the best way to actually apply this information.
Yeah, 100%. And carrying on from what James just said there, while we try to be evidence-based, there's in all studies that work with humans, there's going to be a million different factors that can affect the evidence and affect the results. So as you guys have had a bit of support in saying like, oh yeah, well, we want to hear a bit more detail about studies, and it might even be drip-fed over episodes at a time rather than one bulk one. For now, the biggest things to kind of keep in mind with research with humans is that you can't, with research, obviously, before you complete anything, you have to do an ethical application to make sure, obviously, you're not going to cause any harm. There's no issues that are going to arise ethically or morally. And because of that, obviously, if you're talking about a programming study, you can't just grab a bunch of people and say, you must do this at this time, this many reps, this weight. It's just not physically feasible. So there's that aspect of the moral dilemma, and that applies to all studies, nutrition studies, training studies, all those kind of things. So there's that aspect. Then there's also the other aspect of, even though might not be ethically correct, it's ethically above board, you're sweet. There's also other things that are going to play a role. So for instance, you might be able to get people who are willing and they're happy and they've done the study perfectly. So they've come in and they've gone, yep, I've done X amount of reps and weight for whatever the study's asking them to do. But then they go away and they might not recover well, or they might not eat well or sleep well, or all those things. Like they might have young kids, they might be working a physical job. And those little individual factors are always going to play a role. So it's not as black and white as just saying, oh, yep, this study said this many people did it. If you look in depth, and most of these studies, they'll have a little aspect that's kind of called limitations or things that might play a role in affecting the results. And they're always important to look at. But like we said, we do our best to look at the bulk of the evidence. So there are things that come up time and time again throughout that, and they're the things that we try to touch on. So when we talk about being evidence-based, we're not talking about one study. We're talking about many studies that are consistently coming up with the same things, that are consistently rearing their heads and pointing in the direction of saying, this is what works when you try to do this for that, or those kind of things. So that's just another little point, and we'll continue to try and drip feed as much of this study stuff to you without getting bogged down and boring you with my nerdy stuff.
So like Michael was saying, like no study can really be perfect, and especially when you're dealing with humans and individuals who have so many factors that can change what actually might be happening in their day-to-day lives, and with everything concerning the results that they're trying to get from the studies. And so lots of our information isn't just from studies, it's also from some great coaches, like books that we've read over time that just explain so many nuanced things. But at the same time, what we try to do is we try and get this information out to everyone as broadly as possible. And in coaching, one of the hardest things is you have to adapt to the moment. You can't just be this is the plan, these are the rules, this is what we have to follow, you have to do this or get out.
Things happen in real time. Like, let's go real easy example. The knee hurts during a squat. How are we going to adapt this in real time? And this is what we want to discuss with you guys today, is give you strategies if you're doing that at home. What can you do straight away to regress or progress the position so you can keep kicking butt in your program without having to worry about discomfort or any other bumps that might happen throughout your own programming journey?
Consistency is definitely the priority. Most importantly, when we get someone in, we want to make sure they're getting in for the sessions. They can be starting off with just 2 sessions, they can be starting with 3. As long as they start building the habit of actually training, then we're in the right direction at first. And then as these things happen, then we start getting more direct. We can start becoming more specific. And a lot of what we do here is exactly like that. First thing when we speak to someone, we're like, okay, let's get onto the first kind of rule, the outline, the individual. So when someone comes in initially, we goal set with them. We set some goals. We like to use a kind of something called a SMART goal, which just starts off as SMART being the S being specific, the M being measurable, So what do we need to measure to track progress? The A being achievable, but we'd actually prefer accountability. So this is the social aspect. Do you have people that you are accountable to? And that can here be the coaches. And I think it's as important just to have people at home who are like trying to help you towards your goal or see the goal as important. And then we have R, which is realistic. What do we change that? What do we?
Relevant. So two things before we get in there. So obviously you can play around with these a little bit, and there's different versions of the SMART goals. And we've said how we like accountability for A as well. Achievable, or it depends on which A and R you use. The reason achievable is in there. So everything that James just said obviously stands for accountability. But for achievable, obviously you can't pick a goal that is impossible for you to achieve. So if you're trying to do that, then that's already going to hinder your progress. You're never going to achieve that. Obviously, that's what the point of that being there. So even if it's achievable and accountable, like that's a good little way to play around with that. And then we changed, we believe realistic ties in too much with that. So we changed it to a bit more of a relevant. So relevant being, is there a good reason for you to do this? Is this relevant to, improving your quality of life, improving your well-being? All those things, is there a good and accurate reason for you to complete this goal? I think.
Yep. And then T, which is the time scale. So often we have people come in who their goal is to get to achieve something in 2 to 3 months, or sometimes a longer period, like in the next year. And then sometimes people are just here for the journey. They just want to just see results as time goes by.
Beautiful. Just reiterate one point we lightly touched on, James, was consistency. Doesn't matter how good the program is, if you're not doing it, it's not going to work.
100%.
There has to be a minimal commitment period. And this is something you can discuss like with yourself or with your coach or whoever's helping you. What is the minimal effective dose that you can get in with this program where you're going to start seeing results?
Yep. One of my favorite sayings ever is consistency is better than perfection. So you're very rarely going to have a perfect session. They exist, but very rarely. You're much better off having 3 consistent sessions a week rather than only settling in for 1 perfect session a week. That's just
Yeah, recently with COVID and how different countries handled the COVID epidemic, a good quote that I heard was, "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week." Mm-hmm. So the idea of just getting in, doing whatever is always going to be greater than hesitating and not achieving something. And I think we see members do that all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's this kind of like perfection mentality. If I can't get 4 sessions, then I'm not going to come in at all. And sometimes simply we see people change their habits by saying, "Hey, just do 2."
Yeah.
Knowing that they've calmed themselves down. They're not so angry at themselves for not achieving 2. And then they start doing 3 and 4 straight away.
Yeah. Fantastic. More into the goal setting is understand your why. So if you've explored your SMART, hopefully then you've found kind of your why behind training, which is something we discussed in episode 1. So if you want to dive a bit more back, go into that, check out episode 1. But knowing what is your driver and why you're here is going to be that massive initial motivator that gets things going. And then when we start working out our SMART goals and we start building a plan, we're now building a system behind what our motivation is and what our initial goal is. And that's going to just set you up for so much more success for whatever your program or whatever your journey is.
And the why is definitely behind the specific goal set and the actual, what do you want to achieve from this? And then the measurable, the M, is more actually how are we going to track it? How are we going to test on often to see if we're actually making progress? So we have trackables, or we have key performance indicators or key performance lifts, whatever you prefer. And that ideally is going to tell us that we're actually improving. And that can be looking at your sprint on a bike, your max wattage on a bike, to your max bench press, to your max deadlift, to your max squat, or whatever really resonates with you.
Yeah, so that KPI, so your biggest measurable of your goals, obviously needs to be relevant to your goal as well. So often you can maybe see some different things, and you might say, obviously, you're not going to have a goal to improve your max squat and then measure that and use a KPI of your bench press. Like it doesn't make sense. So make sure you're selective, but make sure it's relevant with choosing your KPIs with your program.
And for the next one, guideline number 2 is reverse engineering.
And this is a great one. We'll just give it like a performance athlete kind of guideline. If you've got someone that has a competition on a certain date, you're going to start your programming from that position. Like, I need this person ready at whatever said date is. And the program's going to end up working backwards to get them where they need to be on that competition day. So if that's a rugby game, or if 100%. That's a jiu-jitsu fight, if that's whatever it happens to be,
100%.
Working backwards is how you got to plan for this stuff. And all the little milestones in between that might need to be achieved.
Yeah, even summertime as well. I want to look good by the beach, for the beach. Simple. It's probably one of the most common ones. I want to look good when I go for a swim. And I think, like you're saying there, having the milestones in the middle leads into, well, is tied in well with something we touched on before with our KPIs and our tracking, is that if you have an overarching goal, so I want to be, I want to lose X amount of weight, I guess, by summertime, or I want to look like this by summertime, you then break up that timescale, into different cycles, and we'll touch on cycles later on in this podcast. But we'll break things down into different timeframes, and there's a million different ways you can track your progress. So there's a few apps like we like Strong, which helps track your workouts and can keep a long list of all your history and training history. Even just pen and paper, obviously old school, sometimes can't be beaten. Notes on your phone, Excel. I'm an Excel man. I love my numbers. But the first thing you need is you need to collect data. You just need to have numbers down and track so you can go back and use it and look at it and go, okay, lifted this last week, or I ran this much last week. Let's try and match that this week, or let's improve slightly, or all those kind of things. First step is to start noting stuff down before you then start to play with it and start to do some things like, track your progress week to week, or, obviously it's hard to give examples without having exact goals and measurables, but, lose X kilos by this milestone. This is where I want to be. I'm this far off, or, there's obviously ways that they can interact with each other and ways of tracking your progress throughout the whole process, instead of just going, I'm at this point and I want to be here by this time. That's all I've got. So breaking it down is a really important step, I think.
Yeah, totally. With the reverse engineering, we have the initial starting point. We have the individual. We've discussed goals. Then we have the very end point that we want to achieve. And then we have to go back to break that down and be like, okay, so what qualities do we want at the very end of our time? Then how are we going to build them qualities up? Even throw in other qualities throughout to then be able to build the finishing qualities even better.
I like to think like a cool analogy to kind of understand what qualities are and what training does is like creating a character in a video game. So have you ever, I don't know, whoever's played video games, I love them. And you build a character and they have like strength stats and speed stats and agility stats and all that sort of stuff. And you can only put so many points into one thing at a time. And so as you're developing that one quality, you're putting that character's skills up, but other things start to fall off if you don't work them. So there's also the ability of trying to maintain them, and you are going to lose some qualities and things if you don't do them at all. They diminish. So you have to kind of phase in the right qualities of the right time if you're reverse engineering. Let's say this athlete needs to have their strength at a top tier level right at the end of the competition. You're not going to have their cardio qualities at the highest point at the end, just before comp. They're going to be working that strength so it's sharp as an axe, ready to go for their competition.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's another thing that we slightly touched on in our podcast last week, in terms of interplaying in some mindsets around things that interfere with each other, and that's another thing that we'll touch on. Is there an interference effect between? Obviously, you can't be everything always at once. You can't be the fittest person on earth and also be the strongest sometimes, depending on how you define those words, obviously. But like a good example is marathon runners and 100-meter sprinters. Their qualities are not going to be the exact same, and there's a reason for that. They're obviously training and priming themselves to do different things. That's what you got to kind of think about, and in your head is, I'm preparing to do this. I can't always do something else at the same time.
Yeah, and you have a certain bucket to improve a certain quality. You have to actually give it a certain amount of time. So if I don't put enough effort in, say for example, I'm doing my sprint work, but at the same time I want to get faster with a 100-meter sprint. At the same time, I want to develop my cardio. Then actually, as well as the interference between the two, the time spent doing the cardio is time not spent doing my 100-meter sprint. So I'm actually going to lose time that I could be training the 100-meter sprint, and my recovery is going to be affected. So I won't be able to spend as much time actually specifically improving the quality I want to improve.
Nice. Probably great segue into point number 3, talking about blocks and structures. So when we're reverse engineering, if we know what our time scale is, we can slice that time scale into weeks, months, however you want to do it, slice it up. So you have multiple different blocks where you specialize in certain attributes to be developed, and to make those attributes kind of link into each other and peak at the right time. So you can dedicate a couple of weeks to one block. Like, oh God, you can have 3 weeks. We use like a 4 to 6 week scale here.
Yeah, we often use the 1 week scale just because it's understandable for people. The month scale, because it's very easy for people to understand. But the macro and micro scales, the micro being like the week normally that we use, can be 2 weeks. It can be a week and a half. It could be 8 days. It doesn't have to be the arbitrary 7 days. And the same thing with the month. It can run for 6 weeks. We do that sometimes. We run 5 week, 6 week blocks. And it doesn't have to be a specific time frame. Really, it runs until you get the qualities improved that you want to improve inside, obviously, the task of having to get the whole thing done in a certain time frame.
Yeah, if you start to see that improvement starting to decay, it might be time to segue into the next phase.
Yeah, or you get diminishing returns. Like sometimes you push something so far that you're making really big improvements, and then later on in the improvements, you can only make smaller and smaller improvements. So it might be time to go change that block, improve another quality that layers and improves the previous or later quality.
Definitely.
Talking more about interference, and interference is really important in training for the fact that if I can pair two qualities, and it could be like a more of a strength quality with a conditioning quality at the same time, I can get far more out of that block than I possibly could. So quite often with ourselves at Benchmark, what we do is the first block we do, I think, endurance style training. So it's still strength training, but it's higher reps. Yeah, and we pair that with your aerobic training. And there's plenty of things going on in the body, the systems that can interfere with pairing things like strength up with too much endurance or cardio. And at the same time, as if we pair the right things together, then we can actually get the best response for the individual inside that month. They can get more work done, they get less interference, their recovery can be targeted to a specific resource.
Yeah, definitely. And it's careful. And like, obviously, like we said before, there's no, one right answer. We do our best to like work between things. And, sometimes, again, like I was saying, my study point, like individuality can play a role as well. So like some people might find if they're double tapping that same area a lot throughout a week, for instance, they're doing a lot of high rep stuff and paired up with long distance cardio training, they might find themselves really draining. Go, oh damn, I just can't, or they can't get up for it. They go, no, I can't do that this week. So sometimes there's like some things that you can roll into. I think we touch on it later, a bit of like conjugate training, kind of where you mix it up a little bit. So pairing up two qualities that may not be completely the same, but they're smushed together a little bit. So maybe pairing those higher rep qualities with a few conditioning sprints or something like that. Not something that you're going to always do, but something you might need to mix things up now and again, and depending on individual variants and those kind of things.
There's a bit of synergy between those qualities. Yeah. They work together, they live together, and they can kind of actually make each other a bit better.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of knowledge needed to know how to pair those correctly, but it comes with a bit of trial and error too, and a bit of evidence backed behind it as well.
Oh, totally. And the other benefit of block programming as well is the fact that it allows a specific stimulus to be deloaded. So if we're hitting a stimulus for a whole month, then moving in, then as people are starting to fatigue and they need time to recover from that specific stimulus, then when we move into another quality, we allow the previous stimulus to be recovered as we hit another stimulus, rather than your traditional deloads of, I've seen all different types of things where you just have a week off, or you can drop the weights massively for that week.
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways to drop it, and then you can just, like we were discussing, you can just change the stimulus. So don't use a deload as a complete, not going to train at all, I need a body to rest. Sometimes you might need that if you've had a really, really intense build up and you're kind of at the end of maybe a 3-month block, or, however long your blocks are, and you've had some really intense training. You might need a week where you do much lower volume. However, if it's just a run-of-the-mill kind of deload, change the stimulus, not necessarily drop the intensity, but that change in stimulus to something that you haven't been training for the past block, I guess you'd call it, that change will force you into a lower intensity because you're not used to that stimulus.
And what? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was about to slightly shift into point 4. Any point 3 closes?
I got a couple more. Like just while one quality is being worked, and then we move into another specific quality, it doesn't mean that the other qualities aren't running in the background. So we would like to actually improve a quality. It needs quite a high dose. Like you actually need to, and then you need to progressively overload that dose. So you actually have to increase the dose consistently, progressively over time. And why that quality is being improved, then we can have other qualities in the background. And to maintain a quality, there is not as much work needed to be done. It's actually quite a small amount of work for a certain quality to be done in the background. So say, for example, we do a more endurance cardio block, and then the second block, we run into more of like a kind of like lower rep range, more strength, hypertrophy focused, with maybe some more like lactate or aerobic power work. And what we can actually do is that lactate aerobic power work in the background is actually going to keep that kind of cardio endurance work burning in the background. And then when we come to the third stage, you've now got 4 or 5 qualities that have been improved, and are nice and high to finish off, to then kind of peak.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And how we structure these blocks, we can look at the bit of the microcycle, like how we're going to, what's the effort of this block one? And I'd say a lot of us are familiar with kind of bodybuilding splits. Like today is a Monday, it's a chest day. Tomorrow it's probably a deadlift, and Wednesday it's whatever. There's many ways to do this. Like we have splits, like upper body, upper lower splits. We have front body, back body. We have speed days. We have heavy weight days. There's a heap of these. And structuring these in the right format can kind of help us peak at the right time.
And different qualities have different, we call it a maximal recoverable volume. So certain qualities, what happens is if I train them too hard, then it takes me too long to recover from it. So if I train really, really intensely, then I'm going to have a little bit longer before I actually recover, before I can actually perform again. Recovery actually being the ability to, say for example, I test and I hit a 70 kilogram bench press. Well, if I a day later come in and I actually can't get 70 kilos again, then that is a sign that I haven't recovered. But the recovery is actually the point of me being able to come back in a day or 2 days later and actually move the same amount of weight. We also have something called a super compensation, where it's kind of better than recovery. It's where I come in and I've improved from the stimulus applied previously, and now I actually can move 71 kilos and slightly better. And the whole idea of the dosing is to actually make sure that we are applying different qualities as well, have different doses. For example, you may notice that when we train power, quite often we're training power and we're actually only doing a couple of reps. Yeah, because it has a lower maximal recoverable volume. So once you've done it, you actually need longer to then rest. But if we're doing something more strength, it has a bit of a higher maximal recoverable volume. And then hypertrophy, for example, these mid-ranges, they actually have a very high maximal recoverable volume. Hence why when we're trying to build muscle, you'll notice that we will do higher reps. We'll start accumulating sets and reps until by the end of the month, we've done a fair amount of work.
Yeah, definitely. I think a few of your points there, and add a couple as well. There are a few terms and things that we can use that we've touched on there. One of them you just said a lot was maximum recoverable volume, which is really important. And the one that ties in with that you also spoke about but didn't give it a name was your minimal effective dose. So that those two tie in well. So when you're trying to plan out your week and you're trying to plan out your week, your month, whatever it may be in terms of your cycle length, is all right. What's the minimum I need to do to grow or to improve in this in whatever aspect you're looking to improve, whatever quality. So you find that's your start point. It's like, obviously I must do that. I must do what I need to improve. And then you just go, then you have, that's your bottom limit. And then your upper limit is how much can I do before I can't recover? So obviously you're not going to know off the top of your head, oh, I know exactly what I can do, 3 sets of this before I can no longer recover. But that takes trial and error and a bit of evidence and a bit of, research and that kind of stuff. But those two things are quite important. And I think the last one is, I can't quite remember the name, but it's, minimal maintenance volume as well. So that's, again, the same thing that we were talking about before with, even though you're switching focuses, your other stuff in the background can still keep ticking over. So if you know that you must do, across a week, let's say, you must do, 6 sets of bench to improve your bench press. So let's just say random numbers. But while you're doing that, you also want to make sure you have a bit of strength in your back as well, or in your legs. So let's use like 2 different examples. You know that your minimal maintenance volume, for instance, may be 3 sets for your squats or something. Having that in the background, so you're focusing on building your bench press strength, but in the background you still got your squats ticking along, so that they're not just forgotten and left behind.
And so importantly as well as the frequency that we apply these things. So where things have different recoverable volumes, then we're going to have to make sure that the frequency that they're implied has changed. So for example, training power doesn't want to be as trained as frequently as maybe training strength or training hypertrophy can be. And that's why when people are trying to get certain attributes or build certain qualities, they're going to have to look at the qualities they want to build up. And they're going to have to look at how they apply the frequency, the volume that they apply to them, and then how they can recover from that, and then how they can apply and what we call progressive overload, which progressive overload is really just the ability to progressively, continuously, slightly increase. And we can say slightly increase weight, but it's not just weight. It can be so many different factors. It can be that you accumulated more volume. It can be that you moved a bar or a piece of equipment or a ball faster. There's so many different ways that we can progressively overload. It can be that you increase the range of motion of an exercise. So inside a macro cycle, which would be like a month, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, we also have like our mini weeks inside that. So we call it a microcycle. And the microcycle is how we break up that 6-7 days. So inside that 6-7 days, we have different types of splits, and so many people are very familiar with these. We have like the most popular, which this is how I started, Mitch, the bodybuilding split.
Oh yeah. We
Obviously.
Yeah.
touched on this a bit earlier, right? The upper Mondays, the Tuesday deadlifts. I think we can all recite it from.
Chest Mondays.
Yeah.
Yeah, which actually I think is maybe a worldwide thing. Coming from England, it's definitely, we do that in England. Over here, same thing.
Yeah.
Michael was just telling us before the podcast that he's technically better than us because he didn't train chest on Mondays. He trained legs on Mondays.
Yeah. And that was just not because I wanted to, I can tell you that much. It was just a logistical thing. Don't worry, I always wanted to train chest. Everyone did when they first started. But when I first started, logistically with I was training for footy and stuff. The only day that I could train in the afternoons with school and everything was Monday, and I found that training legs in the mornings was just a no-go for me. I felt terrible, couldn't get food in before, I wouldn't get through a proper session, so I started to switch it up. And then Monday legs, Monday afternoon legs, and then Tuesday morning chest, straight into it. Had to. It's what got me through my legs.
I personally find that most beginners rush too quickly to the bodybuilding split, and they massively overload specific muscle groups. So you find a lot of people when they first start training, they'll come in and it'll just be one whole day is chest and bis or chest and tris, and they'll massively when you first start training, you actually don't need that much volume on a specific muscle. You probably only need a few sets, or maybe like 5 to 10 sets a week on a specific muscle group. And what we find is a lot of people do is what they come in is they do their first day would be a chest day, and they'll hit 10 to 20 different exercises, pretty much hitting the same muscles over and over again, rather than what most people I feel should start doing is full body training.
This is knowing the individual, knowing yourself. If you don't have a training history, all those points are very, very valid. If you're someone that's done a fair bit of lifting and what we label as like an intermediate lifter and had a fair bit of experience with different modalities, they might need that extra acute volume and that extra frequency to stimulate that stress to get a response. And then someone that's kind of specialized and kind of experienced lifter that's been going for a fair few years that then quite knows what they're doing is definitely going to need that direct stimulus, frequency, volume, and intensity to stimulate the results they're needed. So it's very person dependent. And how long ago were they doing their training? What's the interval from when they last were doing these training blocks? Having that information lets you know what they actually need to do.
And how long they have available to them. So I think most of us started bodybuilding and bodybuilding style training where we're just hitting one muscle group, probably when we're younger and we have more available time to ourselves. So we can spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours in the gym, an hour and 10 minutes on chest one day, an hour and 10 minutes on the back, an hour and 10 minutes on your legs the other day. Whereas as we get a bit more busy with our lifestyles, it can actually be very hard to keep to that and it be efficient to the goal. So most people would actually start off or save a lot of time or be able to fit a training program into a smaller amount of time by doing more of a full body training style in every single muscle group. And I feel here what we'd like to do is we do change it up so often. One of the biggest compliments I find is people say, "Oh, it seems like every session is always different." I'm like, well, really, the same things are happening all the time in the background, and we're doing these very slight changes every now and then, just to provide stimulus. But at the same time, it could just be the rep range is slowly changing, the reps in reserve, so the amount of intensity we want them to apply is slowly changing, or the amount of sets, the total volume is changing.
Definitely, I think one thing that's compared to that, we've touched on all these aspects before, and so like you're saying, obviously you have these splits and whatnot, and so if you're not varying up your program even slightly a little bit, as time goes on, you will run into a few not issues, so say, but I guess they are issues if they're hindering your training. So number one is obviously if you get bored of doing the same thing every day. So if you have been doing the same, use the bodybuilding split, you're coming in every Monday doing chest, bench press, flies, incline bench, all the classics that are really fun, but you've been doing that for months and weeks and you haven't varied it up, you're probably going to hit that diminishing qualities that you've been talking about, for where you're not, your body's like, yeah, sweet, I know what's going on, I've done this before. Alongside with that is really important is progressive overload. So if you've been doing that for that long, but you've been consistently improving and challenging yourself with adding load each block or each week or however frequent you're doing it, not as worrying, because obviously you're still improving, so you're still reaping the benefits, probably just not at the same rate. However, but if you're not tracking, so you can't see those changes, you're doing the same thing day in and out, you're probably going to hit a few roadblocks with your programming. If you're just coming in, you're doing the consistency right, but that's why you might be not getting the results you're after.
I've definitely met those individuals that are just constantly at that plateau.
Mm.
I remember one-on-one training, like working in the bigger chain gyms. I'm sure you've met these people too, James. Is they just do what they do, and they do it every single week, by months, by years. I remember working at like a popular gym franchise and training there for quite some years, and watching just people and throughout their whole journey from when I started there to when I finished, the exact same workout every single day. Nothing changed. Not a weight, not a rep, not a rest period. It was just carbon copy the whole time. And unfortunately, they didn't change. They looked the exact same from year 1 to year 3.
And I think another really important point as well is that the frequency of the training is so important. So if I'm doing something like, for example, a bodybuilding split where I'm hitting just the chest, well, inside each individual exercise, the frequency that I'm applying, I'm not getting enough rest in between hitting that same muscle group again. So what we call that kind of junk volume. It's where the weight that we're using and the reps we're doing can no longer overload the system because we have so much fatigue. And what you find here is, like Mitch is saying, these people will be doing the same thing over and over again, and they're actually never giving them enough time to recover and adapt inside the session or as a microcycle. So inside the week, enough time from day to day, and then enough time in the month to then recover from that specific stimulus. So you can look at it in them 3 different ways: in the very exercise to exercise, from day to day, and then from week to week and month to month. Having the right frequency to recover from the individual exercises.
Yeah. Let's have a look at this point 5. What does a session look like?
Definitely, yeah. So like you touched on there, obviously you got to, most sessions follow a rough, they have obviously the bulk, warm up session, cool down and such, finished. Obviously there's different ways of structuring everything that goes in between, including what you do in your warm up, and how you split that warm up, from movement prep / mobility to your more CNS stuff. So jacking up your nervous system to be ready to lift or to ready to perform whatever you're doing.
Just getting the body hot, right? Get
Yeah,
it warm. It's
exactly.
in the name, warm up. Get the body warm.
Totally.
100%. When it comes down to then obviously training or organizing which movements are going to go where, again, that as always, it comes back to what are you looking to do on that day. So if you're coming in and you go, okay, look, biggest lift today, or so your priority lift, I guess you'd call it, if you're looking at a weight session, if that's a bench press, for instance, you're probably going to do that first. I mean, you're not going to do the one that you think is most important or is your biggest contributor to the quality you're looking to improve. You're not going to do that last when you've had a bunch of other things that have could impact your performance in that lift, I think. I think that's one thing that maybe sometimes gets lost. You look for a bit of variety, and maybe people just take the same session and they just jump up the exercises and they go, oh yeah, sweet.
Exactly. Talking about like KPIs and tracking the lifts. Well, ideally with people tracking, they should really be tracking their main lifts as priority. If they want to track the whole session, that could be fantastic because you can actually check the amount of cumulative load you've experienced. But the main lift is going to have the less variables affecting actually the tracking, because what's going to happen is, say for example, I improve my main lift, I improved by a couple of kilos, or I did a few extra reps, then there's nothing to say that the second movement might not be slightly unrecovered and you might be performing slightly less. So if we can track the first movement, we can use it to see that we actually are moving forward.
They're generally there in a hierarchical order. That first one is your most important, and then the second one's probably the second, and so forth. As in, like, just want to try and hopefully paint a visual for you guys what a session might look like. So, like, just like the old bell curve, right? So a session at the start is going to be pretty low intensity and pretty chill. You're going to be pretty relaxed. You might be on the ground doing some mobility or soft tissue, whatever you like to do. And it's very low intensity, but that warm-up should start to pick up. The body gets hotter. We're moving a bit quicker. We're being a bit more dynamic. As we pick up to that nervous system drill, we're moving fast and explosive. And you can see on that line, it's picking up and the intensity is picking up. I try and maintain that throughout probably my main movement. But as the session goes along into accessories and into the middle of it, it starts to drop off slightly. And when we finish that session with the accessories or conditioning or anything of that nature, it's really going to drop back down close to where it almost started. And then session's done and you're doing down regulation or breathing or something of that nature to really start switching that body into recovery mode.
100%. And at the beginning, that main movement is ideally the movement that is going to improve the most, right? Like that's the movement that we're putting that, say for example, we've recovered that day. That's the movement that we're putting all our energy and effort into, so that we still, and this is another thing saying that is, even the word accessory lifts kind of negs me a little bit. It kind of gets me. The fact that quite often what people do is they perform so well at the beginning of the session, you still got to keep working throughout the rest of the session. And that's where recovery comes in so well. And I see this with people all the time. I see that they actually under-recovered. And then I'm like, wow, you moved that weight. You had very minimal recovery. And you hit 4 or 5 sets in minimum amount of time. Well, sadly, you should probably be sadly for you maybe, you should probably be moving a little bit of a heavier weight. You should be challenging yourself more because you want that recovery.
Yeah.
Those variables are there for a reason. Like that recovery left and right of arc is there for a reason. Finishing early is no prize for that.
Yeah.
Like Anthony.
Yeah, and that comes down to the program side of things. Recovery is such a big point in programming. Actually making sure that we're having a certain amount of recovery for different exercises and for different stimuluses. We find that sometimes I kind of think of it like a fully recovered, half recovered, or kind of under recovered. And with different qualities, we can kind of have them free. Say, for example, we're training strength. It's super important for me to get stronger, to challenge my nervous system, that I actually have a decent recovery. That can be like 3, 4, 5 minutes, sometimes longer. We see that in the powerlifting community. They take very long rests in between sets. And then it can even be like, and then sometimes we want half recovered. For hypertrophy, we're trying to get a metabolic stimulus, and we're trying to get the kind of cause a little bit of damage to the muscles as such. So we actually want to be slightly under recovered.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to endurance work, well, we're trying to get an endurance effect. So we actually want them to be even less recovered.
Bye-bye recovery.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Exactly.
You're going to be fleeting.
recovery, yeah, 100%.
And that same thing translates over into not just, obviously strength training and, weights that we lift, translates straight across into a lot of your cardiorespiratory training as well. So, you're doing aerobic style training, more endurance based, you're not going to have as much, or you might have like relative recovery. So your work to rest ratio, probably not going to be as big as that progresses through to obviously your lactate system, and then obviously into your more sprint based systems where you've got, same as a power lifter, you might say you've got very explosive short duration movement and then chill for a long time, fully recover before you go again.
And pretty much in our program, you're going to have the intensity is you're going to see the obvious differences when it has intensity and it has recovery time. When we have an intensity of reps in reserve of maybe just 1 rep in reserve, you're going to see the higher numbers are going to be like, we're going to say 2 to 3 minutes, maybe even 4 or 5 recovery. When we're having that reps in reserve of 2, 3 or 4, we're going to say, hey, just have a minute 20, a minute 30, and then get back into it.
Nice. Anything extra on sessions?
I don't think so. I think you painted a good picture with the bell curve there.
Yeah.
And I one more point on that maybe is that when people come into the gym, it's always nice to kind of like relax them into it first. Actually, their day's been stressful. That's kind of like, let's relax from that stress. Let's get down on the ground. And we normally start things on the ground. Like it can be foam rolling. We prefer kind of like breathing drills and opening up the spaces of the joints that we're gonna work. And then we slowly get them back off the ground. We get them standing up, and then we're trying to like exhilarate them. We're trying to get now. You're getting stressed from exercise, guys. You're not getting stressed from your previous day. Forget about that stuff. We've relaxed you. Get into it, and then go as hard as possible, and then ending the session with the same kind of thing. Trying to put them back down on the ground, get them to breathe, relax, so they can then. I think actually, we use pranayama at the end of sessions. And I think that's such a massive win, because what you're actually doing is you're saying to someone like they finished the session stress, you're saying to them now start recovering straight away. Right? Get that extra 5-6 hours of recovery.
So like 2 thoughts are in my head. One's like that person that comes in late, like hurry up and get in early so I can relax you. At the same time, like you're coming in late, you're stressed, like you need to find that moment to chill out, take a breath, collect yourself, and then re-enter and start with the process of where we're up to.
Oh yeah, totally. Hurry
up and relax.
And them people that put it running in late are the people that need to relax way more than other people as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Methods.
Yeah, totally. So
Point 6
methods. There's so many different methods. Like we could talk about methods forever. We're trying to be as quick as possible, right? But you have things all the way down to like different tempos of movement.
Yeah.
And again, they tie in with the specific qualities. So say, for example, with endurance, you might get people to, well, it could be anything with endurance. It could be pumping out reps nice and fast continuously, or you might actually get them to slow things down. And with methods like that, it comes with a massive technique improvements. You find people coming down into the movement nice and slowly, owning the whole movement, coming up nice and slowly, and it also controls the weight used.
So think of that, if you're unfamiliar with this, as like adding a tempo to a position. Like in music, how there's tempo as you play instruments or you sing or anything of that nature. It'd be tempo on a movement coming down, a pause, or a tempo on the way up. And as James just said there, it just reiterates the position to someone that might be new. And they don't have to worry so much about load or the reps and all that sort of stuff. It's just about learning to make shapes with their body. And slowing things down is one of the easiest constraints for them to actually own a position.
Yeah, and there's so many benefits of a tempo. For example, like we have 3 phases of an exercise. We have an eccentric phase, which is normally where the muscle is lengthening under load, or the tissues are lengthening under load. Then we have an isometric, that's the change of direction point, and then we have the concentric, is when you're actually normally explosively pushing or
Yeah.
putting away. And you find that all three of them different movements actually have different stimuluses to the body. You can find some of them actually fatigue the nervous system more. Some of them actually create way more muscle damage. So we can use that to our advantage massively in programming to make sure that people aren't overworked and are well recovered.
With these methods too, they're not exclusive to one population, and a lot of this stuff sometimes, like French contrast, might be seen as like an athletic thing to do. People jumping and being explosive, and then going into heavyweights and that sort of stuff. But these are human qualities, human methods. It's not just for one population. So when this stuff is introduced into what we call like GPP for the everyday person, there's ways that we can regress and chop and change it to fit whoever it happens to be on the day. You know, day one beginner has never jumped or landed before, there's still things that they can be taught within that structure and that method that can give them a net positive to slowly build up and to do a higher version of it.
Yeah, 100%. Just because someone who's maybe some at a different point in their, fitness, on the fitness spectrum than you are, doesn't mean that what they're doing doesn't have some form of applicability to you and what you're doing. Like, I mean, I think most people, depending on in any industry, you're going to steal from the best. So, if there's someone who's the best jumper in the world, you want to try and use their training to get yourself a little bit better at jumping. If that's what your goal is, pick and choose the best of the best to try and go, okay, even if you pick their best method and you go, all right, I'm going to tone that down for where I'm at. You don't have to, obviously you shouldn't jump straight into doing what they're doing because obviously they're the best of the best. But just progress where you need to pick and change and make it right for you, that kind of thing.
I also feel that sometimes methods don't take into consideration the human as a person. For example, like powerlifting as one is where remember that powerlifting is a sport where the aim is to lift the heaviest weight that is physically possible, and the way that they do that is by decreasing the range of motion that they have to move through as much as possible. So that's why we have these massive exaggerated arches. Yeah, that's why we have these certain setups of the arms. That's why we try and get the chest as close to the bar as possible. And well, while that might be a really good tool to use when we're going into like a strength phase, that you can steal things from that. Well, most of the time we actually want to develop range of motion and strength throughout the full range of motion. And I find that lots of what we hear about strength training and how it decreases mobility is actually so wrong. Whereas there's a lot to say now that actually strength training through full range of motion is probably the best way to increase your mobility.
It's just such a fun topic. It's like any sport, like powerlifting sport, Olympic lifting sport, CrossFit now sport. They require, here's this word again, specificity. And you have to hone in and develop certain skill sets to be good at your sport, especially if you want to reach that higher top 1% of the 1%. And that comes off with trade-offs, like we were saying earlier, diminishing returns. If you're going to be a bloody good powerlifter, good for you. I hope you're getting paid for it because there are going to be trade-offs. You are going to lose movement. You are going to get certain restricted in certain positions because you have to create maximal force. If this is what you do and this is what you love, good for you. It kicks some ass. But know that it comes off with these diminishing returns. But one more point here. If you're, I don't know, bloody just Joe Blogs just kicking around, just wants to be healthier and move better, those diminishing returns might not be exactly what you're after.
Yeah, and risk and reward as well. So with them diminishing returns, one of them diminishing returns might actually be getting an injury as such. Because, for example, some of these, like you look at Olympic lifters, they spend their whole lives honing in that perfect technique. And it takes a long time to train. Well, do you think that if we're training this Olympic lift continuously, we're actually spending time that we could be giving the people like bigger muscles, be stronger, better aerobic systems, and we're spending a ton of time having to work on technique. And on top of that, some of these exercises can be dangerous because they're high technical exercises. It just adds that little bit of risk onto the exercise. So the very high risk exercise for very little reward to the average person.
Yeah, 100%. And then pros and cons. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So very related to that is that pros and cons and risk and reward. Just to sum up what you're saying there, is it doesn't just relate to injuries or reduced movement or anything like that. It does also affect your time. So it's like time is in itself a con. So same as like we're saying, you got an interference effect, and how much time can you spend, how much of training do you want to assign to this quality. A good example is like you were saying as well is speed training in field sport athletes. Like it's a big one that comes up. So obviously in soccer, rugby, AFL, all those things, it's great to be fast, and everyone kind of wants to be faster. The issue is how much time do you have to put in to make an athlete faster that you're going to take away from them, doing their sport and their sport specific training.
100%. James, what you were just saying, the risk reward, I think is amazing and segues in probably to our next point, exercise selection and the order of what that's done in. Exercises, this is just a big one thing too. They're just tools. They're tools to get a job done. You don't have to, and I feel like I could name 3 exercises straight away that get fetishized. They're like, these are the exercises that everyone must do. And it's squat, bench, deadlift. They're cool movements. They're great movements. And there's heaps of variations of them, but they're not mandatory.
And it's squat, bench, deadlift with a bar, right?
Yeah, of course, right?
When you look at individual exercises, there's so many different pieces of equipment you can use to facilitate different things. And with a certain muscle group working, like a barbell actually limits the muscle to work for its full range of motion. So I will develop strength in certain ranges of motion, whereas a dumbbell can be so much greater a piece of equipment because we can actually strengthen the full range of motion.
And you say anything like you go anti-barbell anywhere and like, oh, you're against strength. You're against developing maximal strength. Yeah. No, dude, I want to get strong as hell. It's just this barbell might not be the best implement for this individual. I still want them to get strong and develop all these beautiful qualities, but we might just do it in a way that's better for them to manage their body and to their center of gravity and their range of motion. And then if a barbell becomes something they want to use later on or they get the capability of using, happy days, 100%.
Yeah, 100%. And I think an important thing you touched on there as well, that I think I'm pretty sure we touched on in I think it was either in the first episode or even the second. It's something about small things about definitions as well. So you just said there, like in your little example of, you're against building maximal strength. Really important that there is a definition around for different people of what strength is. What does strong mean? I mean, it's very easy for them to go, oh, the powerlifting background is like, oh, how much do you bench? How much do you squat? How much do you deadlift? But for instance, the only 9 times out of 10, the rules of like being specific is the best way to get good at doing those things is to do those things. And so, for instance, if you're, it's the same example as I was saying, endurance runners versus 100-meter sprinters. If you're not training to be better at a barbell bench press, you'll get better by doing other things that'll do it, but you're not going to become the best by not doing barbell bench press. And that's the thing. So if that's going to be your direct measure, then unfortunately you're going to have to do it, even if it's not best for you. However, being strong just can have a multitude of definitions and doesn't just require using those big 3 exercises to define that.
And you're just missing out on so many other benefits. You're getting strong for a very small amount of range of motion. You're loading the muscle in a very more exact area. You're not challenging other qualities that you could be challenging. I feel like some exercises just reap so much more benefit than some other exercises where people get really fixated on them because it is impressive. It is impressive to see someone like bench, like God knows what kind of weight. Well, at the end of the day, is that really what you want? Like you're saying, like what does strong mean to you? We touched on it on the I'm pretty sure the first podcast. Really, it's feeling fantastic in your body, being able to be very capable of many different things. I think for myself,
I'll use you as an example, Mickey, like a rugby player in the forward pack. Strong for you is like being in the ruck and being able to compete and hold your body and hold your team's body up against like a scrum or a ruck. Very different than like a power lifter that needs to be strong with a deadlift.
Yeah,
those 2 positions, they do have some correlation, but they're not going to fully transfer over.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And it's one of those things, and I really hate it. And you can do it with anything. It doesn't have to be, weight training. It can be even like some form of knowledge and stuff like that. Is, the bit of just, the ego thing that can creep into gyms that way. Go, oh, how much do you bench? Oh, I'm better than you because I bench more. Or how many chin-ups can you do? Oh, I can do this many. And really frustrating because, like, obviously the attributes that you assign more time to are the ones you're going to get better at. So, people who have a fixation on saying, oh, I'm so healthy, I can do this many chin-ups or this many pull-ups, great for you. But then, that's probably because you're doing more chin-ups. Just because you can do that and someone else can't doesn't make you better than them in any shape or form. Just means your goals are different and your priorities are different.
I think no one comes in and flexes like, bro, what's your 5K? What's your vert? What do you vert? Come on, bro. What do you jump?
I think that maybe is why the CrossFit Games was initially so exciting and so popular, because it was so different, right? They threw a bunch of random exercises at people and said, now do this. I think maybe it did end up having a bit too much of the Olympic lifts in it. And I also think that the intensity at what these athletes who get into the toppest level of the CrossFit Games, they're genetically incredible, right? They can be thrown a massive amount of stimulus continuously and not break. Yeah. And I feel like one of the issues with CrossFit in some senses, because I know there is different CrossFit gyms that do things very differently, is that it can just be very random exercises. They call it a WOD, right? Where it's kind of like, today, this is what you're going to do. And then the next day can be very different and not so much programmed. I know some places do program, but it's fantastic like that. Ideally, if you can program it so people get these nice stimuluses and slowly get progressive overload, I think you're winning.
You touch on a beautiful point there, James. Is too, like, we've all come across really good boxers or WODs, boxers, CrossFit places a quarter. Yep.
I've seen that before.
Boxes,
I've seen it,
boxes, yeah, it is.
Is that actually will regress positions. So like you're saying, these CrossFit workouts are generally of quite a high caliber, especially when they're mimicking the top 1%. These sessions can be pretty hard. And like someone comes in that's quite fresh, they shouldn't probably be doing Olympic lifting. They need to learn basic patterns of how to move their body. So to see a session, or if you're about to do your own program or you're about to do someone else's program and the movement just doesn't feel right or doesn't sit right, having the ability to regress it, take it down a level is so important. And that there's heaps of ways to regress things without getting too nuancy. It can be just reducing the weight, the range of motion, the speed of it, like adding the tempo, what we talked about earlier. Well, what am I forgetting? There's some other basic ones here. Anyway, there's heaps of ways to dull that movement down. And if you're unsure, reach out, help you out. We'll got you back.
I've actually experienced training a lady who was she was training with me and we're getting amazing progress. And then she was her work were paying for her to do CrossFit on the side. Wow. And she was her main goal was weight loss. Okay, so she was 120 kilos and she wanted to just start the progress of losing some weight. And I remember asking her, well, all of a sudden she was coming in exhausted from her week and she'd been doing 4 or 5 CrossFit sessions a week. And I said to her, what did you do last week? And what did you do the other day that has made you so exhausted and you got that shoulder issue? She said she was doing handstand push-ups.
Oh, God.
I was like, that is the complete opposite of what you were saying, Mitch, where we should be regressing and progressing exercises according to the individual's needs. 100%. And yeah, you can't have someone who's 120 kilos jump unless they might be capable of this, but jumping upside down and then trying to do a handstand push-up when they're pretty better off just getting some 5 kilo, 10 kilo dumbbells in their hands and doing an overhead press.
This is not kind of on topic and off topic, and this is just a pet peeve, really. I used to get this too because obviously being in the army, you get people go, "Oh, you're gonna yell at me, bro? You're gonna push me really hard?" I'm like, "Oh, if it's needed at the right time and place, but not really. Working harder does not equate to better. Working smarter is better. Smashing someone with constant intensity that might be an unconditioned overweight individual, they need care. They need intelligence behind their programming to slowly get them where they need to go. Smashing that someone and grinding them into the ground with constant intensity or how you train and just mimicking your training on that person is negligent."
That is a perfect segue to the next one, which is recovery.
Big brain stuff.
Well,
big brain.
So up next, the 8th guideline is recovery. So we've touched on this briefly because you can't really explain the other guidelines without touching on recovery. But we have so many different types of recovery. And we have recovery in between exercise. We have recovery from the end of a week, kind of like a microcycle. And then we have recovery of a macro cycle. And there's so many different ways to apply it. And we're pretty smart on how we add recovery. Say, for example, inside a session, you're training your hamstrings. Well, you can actually do a second hamstring exercise. That could be fine. But we just want to make sure we're not hitting the exact same muscle tissues and fibers in that second exercise. And you can reap a ton of benefits. Like, for example, if I'm doing my first exercise is like a hamstring curl, then that's fine. I can then, and with the hamstring curl, I'm hitting more of my the mid-range fibers of my hamstring. Then I can go do an RDL where I'm going to hit more of them lengthened fibers of them hamstrings. So there's so many different complex ways that you can add or take away or recovery to get the what you want from an exercise or a muscle or a performance stimulus.
Yeah, definitely. And we've touched on this. Like we've been sprinkling it through this whole thing. We've spoken about rest times, assigning those based on your goal and what you're trying to train, varying up the exercise selection to make sure you're not, giving it too much intensity for one muscle or one muscle movement, I guess you'd call it. And then, varying up the 2 different things throughout to say, well, make sure we're not double tapping the same guy or hitting the same area too much.
And something we've been meaning to apply and hopefully we'll have soon is a recovery checklist. Something that actually allows you to walk out of the gym and be like, okay, so I have an electrolyte drink. 5 points. You know, like
Yeah.
something and you can look at this yourselves. You can actually look at it and be like, okay, so how fast can I recover for my next session? I think it's extremely fun thing to do because this is how you're going to improve much better. And those people, it's not common that people take care of their recovery.
Yeah.
So I think if you're someone who's a little bit like, I want to improve and I want to be better than other people, then take care of your recovery and you're going to be a step ahead. I think it's things like drinking electrolytes, getting massages, like having a bath, having a shower, doing some meditation. All these things are such incredible recovery tools that people don't utilize enough.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and I have a few things to say about recovery in general. So obviously being a bit more database, a bit more evidence-based, and I need to precursor this by saying, backing up what I was saying before, obviously with be aware of studies and how they don't always account for individual variants, all those things. And also they also can't account for purely they can only account for sometimes a purely objective results. Sometimes obviously there's subjective studies, but that's not important right now. We'll talk about those later. So for instance, you mentioned massage, you mentioned, electrolyte drinks, all these things and recovery tools that have been promoted out there. For some things and a lot of things, hasn't been shown scientifically to be a direct correlation between some modalities, for instance, massage and recovery, with a big asterisk next to that. So like that, don't just snip at that and take that as your one bit, because that's not what I'm getting at here. So important to note, those studies are mainly done in terms of kind of pure performance, or in rarer, but they're done on more of a in muscle studies, which we're not going to touch on. But what I'm trying to get at here mainly is don't fixate on things that you think might make you recover better. So if you just think, oh, everyone says massage is good for recovery, I'm going to go get one. The big thing is, even though studies might not fully support what you're doing, so whether that's a massage, whether that's any different modality you choose in terms of things, a really good thing to remember is, if it relaxes you or it helps you to relax, you're reducing stress on the body, and therefore you're going to put yourself in a position to recover better. So what I'm trying to say is, even though I might not be able to whip out 10 studies and say, oh yeah, massage is going to improve your recovery, or what I will be able to say is and this is what we're getting before, we do our best to be evidence-based. So we're not going to tell you that this is the perfect thing for you to do. We are going to say some people find it helps them because it helps them relax and puts them in that state where they can recover more. And other people feel like they hate a massage. They go there and it makes them tense because they're sore. They've gotten a bad massage before. They don't like it. Look into what helps you recover the most.
Totally. We discussed this the other week on the last podcast, is that people need to find what actually relaxes them and calms them down, feels like their recovery. And sometimes, like Michael was just saying, with the massage, the funny thing is like, how often maybe do you get, like, if you get a massage at 2 p.m., how often do you normally just lie down for an hour at 2 p.m., which could be what's actually working for you? There's some calm music in the background. It's calming you down.
Nice smells going
it's not
on.
actually the act of massage isn't so much scientifically proven to relax you, but we know that if you lie down for an hour and like there can be relaxing music, that can definitely be what's happening. So you don't always know actually what's in play with certain things. Quite often with many different things in the world. But you have to figure out yourself, you as an individual, what makes me feel relaxed, and trial and error, 100% massively for every individual person.
Yeah, I'll go one more point in this. Is like, I've known quite a few high sports teams that make their athletes hit a recovery, like a minimal recovery list. So they go, guys, every week you must get 200 points, for example. And you touched on earlier, James, like an electrolyte drink might be like 10 points. 6 to 8 hours worth of sleep might be 30 points. And anyway, throughout their week and their training stress, they have to reach a minimal point scale. So they have to do all these different things, meditation worth whatever, time with their family worth whatever. Having those little, like a gamified version of recovery, I guess you can call it, is a beautiful way to make sure that you're giving yourself plenty of relaxation so you can get adaptation and you can take on more stress.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to backtrack. I forgot to mention this, but you just reminded me. So there are the fringer things, so the things that I was saying that in terms of scientific fringe of like what's been shown to help recovery. So I'm talking massage, maybe some compression garments, things like that. But most importantly are your big rocks, are the things that have been shown up time and time again to help you recovery. And that's said here, nutrition and sleep. They're your biggest tools that are going to help you to recover. So if you're trying to grow, especially, and you're smashing yourself in the gym, you're working hard, and you're going, damn, why can I not seem to, build muscle? It's probably, excuse me, probably because you're not eating enough and you're not recovering well. So you need to make sure you're getting a nice, balanced diet, making sure you're fueling yourself up efficiently and effectively, and also you're recovering. You got to sleep. And if that means you can't get enough sleep at night, maybe try sprinkling a nap here or there. when you're asleep, that's when you do the most recovering, and that's when your body rebuilds itself, it repairs itself. All the hormones are flowing, everything's going well. If you're skipping that, that's gonna put a lot of things out of place when you're trying to achieve your goals. Regardless, and it's also just not gonna make you feel that good.
Yeah. And in regards to that, when we spoke about maximal recoverable volume, well, maximal recoverable volume isn't always just a exercise volume intensity problem. It's also a recovery problem. Well, if I can recover better, then I can perform more, get more volume. My maximal recoverable volume of an exercise or a certain muscle or a stimulus actually massively increases. So it's two ways to hit it, right? I can actually train harder and then try and recover harder, so then I can train harder again.
So we're segueing into point 9 now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
100%.
It's kind of like it builds off recovery, right?
Oh, totally.
In point 9, we're talking now deloads and resensitization. What a sexy word.
Isn't it just? And it's so simple. Like a deload, we've spoken about it a few times already today, and like all this stuff is going to just go over and over. But with the idea of deloads, is it doesn't have to just be a week off or a complete drop of sets and reps. It can just be a change of stimulus. Also, with resensitization, like it can be the idea of resensitization can be where you go away from a stimulus to then come back to a stimulus to get more out of that stimulus because you have desensitized yourself. This is seen massively in like top range lifters, right? Where what actually happens, they have to train a lot less and they have to have more frequent deloads. It's not so much with general population. Probably the way we do it is best for general population, where we actually change the stimulus more so. But there's also a good time to have recovery days. I think some people smash the gym too much. They do 5, 6, 7 sessions, and that's why they don't get an improvement.
5, 6 sessions and then play their sport 2, 3 times a week and go for a hike on the weekend and all that sort of stuff. Like awesome, great, active, healthy individual, but dude, you need to chill out as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important to, when you're, it's very easy to, I say very easy for us, like people who love training. It's easy for us to jump in and go, oh, can't wait to program this session. I can't wait to plan out this block, hit this training session, etc. It's not as common for people to plan out their recovery, to plan to go, okay, I want to hit this many a week. That means I have to recover this much. Or do I replace that activity, say, on this day, instead of going in and training and doing this and applying more stimulus to my body, do I use that day to take that as my planned recovery day? Plan to go and, go for a nice walk, go for a swim, do some things that relax you in that hour. So say you're going to assign an hour to training. Sometimes you're better off just go use that hour to go enjoy yourself, recover, instead of adding more stimulus.
Because we've hit these points so hard already, like that is again a segue into auto-regulation, right? The idea that nothing is fixed in stone. That you have a program and say, for example, I have to train Monday. Well, maybe if I train this Monday session on Tuesday, I might perform better. Maybe if I change this day to a recovery day, I might perform better. Maybe if I actually drop my intensity on a session, I might perform better that day.
This is a really tricky topic, especially with auto-regulation, especially because it can be really effective in a few ways, but it can also be tricky sometimes. So in terms of what I mean by that, in terms of switching days and whatnot, so say, for instance, you wake up and you're feeling pretty rubbish. You're going, oh, damn, I'm tired, I'm doing this, don't feel like I should train. That's okay if it's honest, all right? If you're honestly going, nah, I'm pretty flat, I feel fatigued, I don't think I could train today, or maybe I shouldn't train as much. That's fine. Obviously, we're going to have those days. Make sure you have something in place to help you make that decision. So for instance, I would recommend, again, if you just want to train that day, or just still head to the gym if you can, if you're well enough to do that, obviously, head to the gym, try to start your session as you normally would, and then alter up the load and the stimulus based on how you're feeling, rather than just going, no, I'm terrible. Okay. Whereas there are days where you should do that. If you're absolutely, not recovered at all and you cannot fathom going to the gym, probably a good sign you need to rest up and recover.
And sometimes the session can just be not for the session, but for the consistency. It can be just for the habit building side of things. It can be like, I got that session in and now I am slowly building a habit to get in every Wednesday or to get in 3 times a week, which I think, again, going back to what we said at the beginning, consistency is the most important. You're better off getting something done than trying to perform at your absolute max all the time.
And that's more important when you're earlier in your journey, when you're just trying to form the habit. If you're someone that's been doing this for years and years and years, and you're like, man, I'm just not on today. You know your body. You've experienced it. You know what's up. Chill. But as you're learning this, come in and try and adapt. And we have some inbuilt systems that we use here, like things like reps in reserve. If you start to understand that concept, it auto-regulates you to the session. So having that little buffer, like, oh, my form will decay in 3 reps time, will help you pick the right type of weight to get the right stimulus, but also make sure you're not going to smash yourself.
Yeah, 100%. So reps in reserve can be a really useful tool for auto-regulation. So in essence, all you're doing is you finish your set and you go, or during your set, you're probably better off. During your set, you go, okay, I want to go until I've only got 2 more in the tank. So 2 more good reps, I should say, until I fail. And that's either form failure or strength failure. Unfortunately, obviously, you're not going to be able to know that as soon as you first time ever try to use it. It takes some trial and error. You got to get used to using it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. Like a lot of things, obviously, the more you can get in tune with yourself and go, okay, now I'm hit the limit now. I'm at my 2 or I'm at my 1. Also, it's good to remember that as you start to creep away from 1 rep in reserve, so on essence, they kind of recommend about 3 or 4 be your upper limit of how many you prescribe, just because 4 reps is a long way away. So you can be, you can hit, if you're doing a set at 8 and you get to 4 and you go, oh, I can definitely got 4 in me, I reckon. But sometimes then you get to 6 and you go, oh, no, I don't. So try to 3 to 4 is probably your upper limit, but it's still a really, really useful tool to making sure you're staying in that zone, and you can just adjust the loading based on how you're doing.
And just some really anecdotal evidence on this. For example, reps in reserve is a hard thing to get down, and it does take a lot of training to actually fine tune knowing when you've only got 1, 2, or 3 in the tank. Actually, 1 is probably the easiest because you physically are stopping. But at the moment, we're running through an AMRAP block. So what we're doing at the moment is last week we ran 6 to 8 reps, and with our 6 after 3 to 4 sets, they did an AMRAP. So they did as many reps as possible with a 10% drop off on weight. Well, that is the best way to find out if you actually are using an RIR. So this week we did an extra 2 reps less. So we did 2 reps less than last week. So most people are actually going 1 weight heavier, then drop into what they did last week for an AMRAP, 3 to 4 sets in. So if you can use the weight you used last week, and then you can perform 4 to 5 more reps than what you were performing last week, then you definitely are probably not using the reps in reserve efficiently.
You just got played.
Yeah, everyone's just been played.
That's okay.
Yeah.
If it's
it's learning, isn't it? They are learning in the process at the time.
AMRAPs can be a huge going to failure when done properly, and when it can be of really good use, because you go, that's my limit. That's what it feels like. Now I can actively go, stay as far or as near away from it as I want to.
Yeah, and like Michael was saying, 4 reps can actually be very hard to guesstimate. And actually, most good stuff happens in 2 to 3s. So most of the evidence pushes towards 2 to 3 reps is actually the best rep range to be in. And every now and then you should go to failure, and not too often should you be going to failure, because it's a hard place to recover from.
Yeah.
Once you've gone to failure, you're going to have to take a few more minutes, or sometimes days. If the stronger you are,
100%.
the more output you can put out, the longer you're going to have to recover from that output you put out.
That's massive. So I want to give you one other tool in your toolbox for auto regulation. It's a very common tool. It's a rate of perceived exertion, RPE, and that's simply as like, guys, this is a 7 out of 10. And you think 10 is the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, 1 is the easiest thing you've ever done. You're trying to pick that subjective 7 to you. And 100%. That is another very common and pretty accurate way to kind of find that intensity and load for yourself. I think we found RIR, reps in reserve, are probably a more effective system. Yeah. But again, it's just another tool in your toolbox for your programming design.
Yeah, definitely. They interlink. So the RIR was developed based off the RPE scale, just to make it a bit more obviously relevant and specific to weight training. So if you base off the same scale, RPE 10 is failure. That's 0. You've got nothing left to give. And then obviously it's got a much bigger scale, 10 numbers rather than we work within a 4-number scale. But they're developed off the same thing. They're measuring the same, doing their best to measure the same thing. And that's just your exertion and how much effort you're putting in.
And one more thing with auto-regulation, and I think these are probably what we've discussed previously as being maybe the most important in my eyes, is tracking. And when it comes to tracking, if I am tracking and I'm seeing continuous improvement to my my KPIs or my main lifts, then if them numbers are stagnating for too long, I think a plateau is kind of defined as like 3 weeks. But if I'm plateauing for 1 or 2 weeks, then that's when I'm going to start making adjustments outside of that, where I'm going to look at my recovery. I'm going to look at what I'm actually doing, what kind of weight I'm using, and I'm going to try and work around it. It's continuously looking at how you're improving and being like, oh, what can I do to change things up to keep improving further forward faster?
Yeah, definitely. And building off what James just said, and something that we touched on earlier, is with your tracking, obviously, the more information you have, the better understanding you're going to get. So, for example, if we're tying into auto regulation and things, and you've got, so you say you only just started tracking last week, and then you front up this week for another session, but today you're feeling pretty busted and you're still going to train, but you're feeling pretty sluggish, pretty slow. And so you come in and you auto regulate yourself to 2 reps in reserve, and because of that, you're using a lighter weight for the same reps. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. This is why, obviously, you have to start somewhere, but it's good to have more data, because if you just look at your data that you've got there, 2 weeks, all you're going to see is a drop in the weight you've lifted, depending on how you track, obviously, unless you're accounting for reps in reserve. But so you're just going to see a drop in weight, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You train to the same intensity you're looking for. It's not a huge deal. You need to look at that, and then after 4 weeks of training, 6 weeks of training, 6 weeks of tracking, I should say, 8, 10, goes on and on. Eventually, that kind of what may look like a huge drop will eventually just be a little bump. Little bump as you're going to hopefully go along on a general upwards trend, hopefully.
Looking for that trend and trying to see that nice, like underneath them curvy lines, because we go up and down. You have to meet a few failures on the way. Like you have to redirect your attention every now and then. And the idea is that over long periods of time, we look back at that information and we go, oh, actually, 2 years ago, that bench press was much less. I have improved.
100%.
Shall we call that our 10 points? And from here, let's talk some accessory stuff. Like, these are cool stuff to know too. I think one of the most important things is how to spot BS and what BS looks like with programming, and I guess just lack of programming is a big one as well. I'd say that's probably your first red flag. If you walk into some facility or you're in a training system at the moment and there is no structure, it is a randomized workout. It's a sweat session rather than training you for a set purpose. That's probably one of the biggest ones, I would say.
I don't want to call anyone out, but certain types of group training gyms that pretty much make everything aerobic. Yeah. So when you look at a certain stimulus that's applied, I think if you're gonna be functional, or you're gonna build as much the best human being possible, then you've got to work on these different qualities. You've got to be able to hit strength, and you need a certain environment to improve strength. You need that, you do need some barbells or heavy dumbbells, and you do need to make sure that strength works probably at the beginning, right? You can't be then putting saying it's a strength exercise too much so, when really what you're doing is just loads of high reps, very quickly paced out with minimum recovery in between each, because it's not going to challenge what strength is. It's going to challenge the same thing every single time. It's going to challenge your aerobic system.
This system is somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes and 50 minutes, somewhere in between that. It's very popular.
Yeah.
Anyway,
there's time we've touched. This the crux of this whole thing is a lot of things we've touched on. There's a time and place for pretty much all types of training and all types of things. 100%. However, be aware that if you're trying to do one quality, make sure that your training is progressive, and also it's planned. It's you can't just throw random stuff at a chalkboard and imagine it's going to make something fantastic. Like, you got to plan out what you're doing, have a process of how you're going to work through it, and a way to track of how that's improving.
I love this one. Any idiot can make another idiot tired.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. Burpees on jumps, on push-ups. It's pull out your ass.
And it's like Michael just said as well. There's nothing wrong with aerobic training. It's fantastic. We want to be aerobically fit, but we also want to progressively overload. If you're going to be a cardio training place and you're going to make everyone as fit as possible, well, we have to make sure that's progressive as well. We can't just be doing the same thing over and over again. But most people generally need that underlying aerobic fitness at first. So I think what these kind of group training gyms do is they're perfect starting places. They can be really useful to get in and just build up your fitness to a moderate level. But sadly, it probably won't ever get much higher than that.
Yeah.
And then you can go off and learn from something like this podcast, or go to maybe a gym that specializes in its training and its programming a little bit more, like Benchmark, and actually start moving forward. And one of shameless plug, and one of the things that we do here, and I'm really proud of how much I see most members improve. For the amount of members that we have, you look at them a year ago and you look at them a year later and you're like, wow, you look fantastic. Sometimes I'll say it to someone, they're just like, kind of, really do I? I'm like, yeah, dude, you look completely different to how I recognized you a year ago.
And improvement is, in so many different ways, And even if you ask them as well, you can, obviously there's things you can see, like as appearance, to see the weight they're lifting as well. Having a connection with them and discussing things, years time, they go, oh my God, I'm feeling so much better. I'm moving so much better, which is sometimes even a better feeling, because you go, oh, I can do this with my kids. I can do this with different people. That's a huge win.
And a lot of that is other gyms calling themselves evidence-based, when I really don't feel that lots of them are actually putting in their very best effort to use and apply that evidence-based training.
These are facilities with pretty deep resources as well.
Yeah.
Like they can find this information. It's out there. It's out
Yeah.
there. I want to talk about another very preyed on population for this type of stuff, and just young blokes. Young
Yeah.
blokes
Oh,
are probably
yeah.
like in their early teens into late teens that are generally default to looking at bodybuilding type of training
Yeah.
and trying to put muscle on. And you see these guys buy bodybuilding programs
Mhm.
that just aren't designed for them. They're designed for a drug-filled athlete. I don't say this in a demeaning way. Like if that's your sport, again, good on you. Happy days, great stuff. But to say that this program that you're currently doing is designed for a 16-year-old bloke that's just entering weights, where you are a fueled beast with a bunch of hormones like to help you adapt from the stimulus and to progress to it, that's not something a young 16-year-old can sustain and maintain.
And
Yeah.
whether or not it is the steroids that have got them to the size they are, if you are admiring their body, then the training that they're probably doing at this moment in time is probably not where you should actually be starting. If they've actually got somewhere, then they've had some sort of progressive overload, and the stimulus that they can apply to their bodies right now is far greater than the stimulus that you can handle right now.
Yeah. So I think something to touch on, this ties into so much stuff as well, not just training, but also a big one is with nutrition as well, is with beginner trainers and different things is if you're completely new to training, you've never done anything before, you could almost throw any stimulus at that person and they're going to grow.
Yeah.
And so that one of the hardest things, especially is with this conversation and when we say we're trying to be evidence-based, and it's sometimes we hit a lot of roadblocks because we're trying to challenge mindsets, which is a really tough thing to do. And we try to, it happens to us still now, you have a bias that you lean towards and you go, I must do this, I must do that. But it's even harder to break those mindsets and try to inform some people. If, for instance, you are that 16-year-old kid, you buy the program, you do it, you've never trained before in your life. So even lifting some weights a week is going to give you that adaptation. And then in your head, you go, oh, this is how I must train. It gave me results.
Yeah.
Why would I go to something different?
Exactly.
And that mindset, it applies to a lot of diet culture as well. And it's really hard to break. And it's very frustrating. It's also quite,
Such an amazing point, Michael. It's like that first, I lost my first 5 kilos like this, even though I put it back on, but that's how I lost my first 5 kilos. So they always go back to the way they lost their first 5 kilos. When someone is doing strength training, again, like you can throw any stimulus at a beginner, but I think like, say for example, the first 3 to 6 months, they can get so much gains. No one will ever get them gains again that you'll get from your first
Newbie
3 to 6
gains.
months. So let's make sure we do it right. Like Michael said, putting in them kind of them little things to make sure that they understand that this is a progressive thing that we're going to keep working towards, but also at the same time, making sure that they get the most out of that initial gains.
Yeah.
Like, wow, if you got 3 to 6 months when you first start training, I love getting newbies in here because I'm like,
oh man,
3 to 6 months, we're looking at a different person.
Oh,
like, and I
100%.
love that.
I want to talk about one other Pareto population. I know we've already covered a lot of these points, but this deserves it. Is young ladies, because we talked about young blokes and young ladies. There's like a whole different marketing strategy to attack these. We talked about young blokes and it's all muscles and hypertrophy and bodybuilding image. And young girls, what do they get? They get like the body weight bloody bands around the knees and doing a bunch of donkey kickbacks and that sort of stuff and lots of plyometrics and that sort of stuff. So the marketing model is very different for these young ladies and thinking this is the way I have to train. And again, we're just going to reinforce the same points, but they're limited training methods that are getting thrown at them. And you're going to lose the ability to layer and progress these systems.
100%. Oh man, you can sit here for hours and hours
Yeah.
commenting on the things that are sent out through social media and things to all women and young ladies especially is just terrible. And there's so many things you could try and challenge, but it's very tough because it's saying the mindset thing might be a bit different. It might not be, oh, I got results with this. It's I saw this person doing this. I should do that. They look like that. I should do that to look like that, which is tricky. And the same applies with the bloke scenario as well. They see a huge bodybuilder, the girls see a lovely lady or whatever, whoever they're trying to look like, and they go, oh, if this is what they're doing, that must be what I'm doing. And it's always important to remember that 9 out of 10 things most likely on the internet are trying to sell you something. If they're putting up these on Instagram, they're trying to sell a program, they're trying to sell, engagement with their thing. And it's unfortunate, but it's something you really need to be aware of.
And I think one of the biggest things you hear females when they come into the gym say when they are kind of more scared of the strength training side of things is that they're actually worried they're going to get big and bulky. And obviously, this does change with some people because there are some you can get whatever you want from training. At the end of the day, I've tried to be big and bulky nearly my whole life. It's been very hard work. So you're going to have to train for long periods of time. You're going to have to eat the excessive calories to put on the muscle as well. And going to say that actually lots of females could do very well from having these kind of phases where they actually try and put on as much muscle as possible as well. And I think sometimes you actually got to go out of the path to get back to your path a little bit. Like we talk about it, like some of the most important things with nutrition can actually be your maintenance phases, which is not sexy and not many people like to do it, but it's what most people are missing. And it's the same thing I think with lots of females with training is actually the time to actually put this is a time now to eat a little bit more and put a little bit more muscle mass on, because like we spoke in the last episode about health and how important muscle mass is to health. You're missing something if all you're doing is trying to like burn into, I hate this, the calories. And so you're missing something if all you want to do is burn into calories with your training every single time. And there can be some really bad implications of training if you are pushing out too many calories and not eating enough back on it.
Really want to touch base on this, and this can be a whole separate chat, and I'll try and condense this and at least just plant the seed. Is matching nutrition to certain stages of programming. We talked about blocks, we talked about structure and developing certain things in certain areas. Matching nutrition to help develop what you're after is massive. There is a time and a place to be in a slight deficit, to be consuming less food than what you're outputting. And that can be like something in a more cardio, high rep based kind of stage of training. But as we segue into trying to put some muscle mass on and perform big feats of strength, we need some fuel in our body. We need to probably be in that surplus. We definitely need to be in that surplus to put on some muscle. So to be able to match nutrition for what you're currently doing, A, with your training and B, with your lifestyle, it's huge.
We've actually managed to do a really good job in this podcast on not touching on nutrition much. It's come up here and there, but it's so important to everything. Like we have touched on it in recovery. We're now touching on performance as well. And really, it's them two things have to be hand in hand as much as physically possible. And you're not going to get what you want from the gym if your nutrition isn't on the side. And
yeah, definitely. And I think programming as a whole, as a word, is doesn't just apply to, as you've just said, we've touched on all these things throughout the thing. It doesn't just apply to what you're doing in the gym or what you're doing when you're training. It applies to what you're eating. It applies to how you're recovering. And I think part of the reason we didn't touch on nutrition as much is because we know that's a whole other thing that we get stuck talking about for very long.
Plant the seed today. Plant the seed.
100%. That's going to be a fantastic podcast. I look forward to that one myself.
Oh, that's somewhere where I'd like to probably bring someone on and help us, guide us through that journey and drive it home.
Definitely.
Nice. I guess a bit of a summary, guys. Do we want to go over just PowerPoints here?
Yeah, huge. We can, I guess, we run through we obviously read track on the top, the 10 points we made.
Number one most important thing is consistency in your training. Make sure you're getting in first.
Yep. Know what your goals 100%. Are and what your why is. Yeah. And that kind of just, it points the ship in the right direction. And it's hard to get somewhere if you don't have a direction.
Yeah. Come off the back of your why and think, okay, that's what I want to do. That's why I want it. How long do I have until I want to get there? And you can have multiple goals. Something we didn't touch on before. You can have more than one.
Yep.
And they can be altering timescales as well. One by Christmas, one by 2 years' time, one by 5 years' time. And they can change as you go through.
That's what that kind of conjugate approach is as well. You can't actually get them all together at the same time, but they're probably not going to be as improved as what you could if you spent more time on one.
Yeah, 100%.
Number two, reverse engineer. If you have a date to achieve something by, Michael gave a great example earlier, like summer, it's time to look bloody good. That's a date. That's a time. If you have a sport, you definitely have a date. So to work backwards and to know that's your time frame to try and achieve your task.
Yeah, number three, block programming. So looking at macro cycles, like large cycles of training, and the frequency and the qualities you want to improve in them specific cycles, and just looking at any interference that you might have in the way.
Yeah, definitely. And then going deeper down into your micro cycles, which is 9 times out of 10, into your weekly cycle. So how do you split up your week? Push, pull, split, upper, lower, if you're in that phase of doing your bodybuilding split, how to do it most effectively if that's where you want to stay.
Then the exercise layout. So how you start the session, the big part of the session, which is aiming to improve performance, keeping track of that, and then actually some down regulation at the end of the session.
Point 6 was our methods when we were discussing what are we going to be using to achieve our training in our training blocks. And these can be, there's so many out there. These can be bodybuilding methods, powerlifting methods. It can be French contrast. It can be conjugate. We've already touched on that. Tempoed, eccentric. There's so many ways to do this. They're not exclusive to certain populations. You can use whatever you need to get the job done. What is the best method to get you to where you need to go? And is that method suitable for where you are at your current journey?
Yeah, and then point 7 was exercise selection and order. So choosing the exercises that best split into driving you towards your qualities, and ordering them within your session to make sure that this might be your main lift, the one that's going to give the most stimulus to the quality you're trying to train. Probably chuck that at the start. Make sure you're tracking that as well. Take in mind with all the risk and rewards of different exercises, not just in terms of injury sense, but time sense, all those things and different ways that you can structure your sessions to get the most out of them in terms of what you want.
I'm going to tie the next two in together, 8 and 9, recovery and deloads. How you go about giving yourself little rests in between exercises to perform the best, rest in between weeks, and how you change up the stimulus over the months, and deloads and resensitization, how you actually make sure that we're recovering well with deloads, how we drop down the volume and intensity, and resensitization, how we actually change the stimulus to be able to resensitize ourselves to the stimulus later on.
I was blank down there. Did we do point 10?
No. Point 10.
Point 10, auto regulation.
Pretty an overarching thing, auto regulation. We want to make sure that we're always looking at what we're doing, how we can change it to continuously perform at our best and improve, and looking at when things are getting in the way, how to stop them and change things up continuously. Always looking at what you're doing and how you're improving.
100%. And then we just finished off by having a few points about things to be aware of and things to be mindful of when you're seeing things, whether it's on social media, whether it's wherever
beware.
Social media, podcasts, Instagram, whatever it may be. Have a think about, is this what's best for you? Is this what you think is accurate? Do you think, is this person just trying to sell me something? These questions are also things you can ask, and make sure before, obviously, if you are looking at buying something, do some research first. Check it out. Do you agree with what they're saying? Do you think it's true? Are you just looking into it because that person looks good and they talk well? Beware of your little biases.
Can't judge a book by its cover sometimes.
Well, I guess that's it. Hopefully, all we want to get out of this is talk about our systems and how we use and what is our lens with programming, and what have we seen been effective and driven results for our members over the last couple of years. And even not just members here, it's also our personal journeys previous to that as well. And hopefully the information we provided today gives you guys the tools to start thinking about your own training, whether you're with us at our gym, Benchmark Canterbury, or if you're on your own journey at your own gym or your own home gym, that you now have a few tools to develop a more structured program and to provide direction to where you want to go.
I think it's a good point to make as well, is that if you aren't training with us and you do want you have any questions on this, on programming or anything, we can talk about programming all day long. And I'm always happy to speak to someone. If they just contact us at info@benchmarkcanterbury.com.
Nice. And for the potty, give it a 5-star, give us a review. We'd muchly appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, and we'll keep building this content on a weekly output.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.